Hi and welcome to Rhonda London Live. On the show today, discrimination or the reality of doing business. Obese airline passengers who cannot comfortably squeeze into a single seat should be provided a second at no extra charge. That is a recommendation of a Canadian Transportation Agency report. The report says obese passengers should be considered disabled and the airline should accommodate their special needs. However, a group representing Canadian air carriers claims providing the extra seats would cost the industry at least $25 million every year. What do you think about this? Should obesity be considered a disability? And should the airlines make special accommodations for their needs? As always, the phones will be open to take your calls to hear your thoughts. So don't go away. We're back right after this. Welcome back to Rhonda London Live. Should obesity be considered a disability? According to the Canadian Transportation Agency, the answer is yes. An airline carrier should make special accommodations for people who are too heavy to fit into a single seat. As a matter of fact, the Transportation Agency is saying that obese people should be given a second seat at no charge to them. With his thoughts on this, we're joined by lawyer Paul McKeever. He specializes in civil litigation, and he is also a member of the Freedom Party of Ontario. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Your initial reaction to this controversial ruling?
I think the whole issue is a little bit misleading. Certainly it is the case that people who are overweight or who are obese may be disabled. They may have certain abilities that are either limited or altogether not there. But the bigger issue is, should such disabilities be compensated at the expense of, a service provider? What we're really talking about is the government deciding what to do with other people's property, particularly in situations where the government's not willing to foot the bill themselves.
But isn't it necessary, though, sometimes, Paul, for the government to step in? Because you can't just leave it up to industry or the market to provide, to always make the decision that's right.
Well, I think they always do make the decision that's right, in the sense that their purpose in even carrying on an activity, a service activity, for example, is to make money. In the case of large corporations, for the people who own the shares of the corporation. If you have a person who says, because of my weight, for example, I need 2 seats, but I'm not willing to pay, I would rather make you pay. And the government says, yes, we agree with that, so we will make them pay, and if they don't pay, we'll take money from them, or whatever penalty there may be. What you're really talking about is something that's not really distinguishable from a mugging. It's no different than a person saying, walking up to the ticket line and saying, I can't afford 2 seats, give me your money so that I can buy a second seat, or I'll do violence to you, or I'll hold you down and take it. The only difference is that the people who are benefiting from the money are not doing it themselves. They're asking government to do it for them.
But what about if, let's say, a person who's in a wheelchair, and in order for them, let's say, to go out to see a movie, to go out to the local theater, there has to be special accommodation, so that there has to be a certain row of seats, and many movie theaters are now providing that.
Right.
That's not done without the company incurring costs. And it's certainly, I don't think any of these things would be done just on the goodwill of business.
Right. Well, I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that. I know that it costs no more to make a 4-foot wide door than to make a 3-foot wide door if we're only talking about an opening. Certainly if you're putting an oak door in the middle of it, yes, it may cost a bit more.
But you know, those big rows at the back of a theater, though, you might be able to fit in 2 or 3 people in wheelchairs, but if you might be able to accommodate 2 whole rows of seats for other patrons.
Well, that's true, and that's something I think that the service provider has to decide. But I think in this society where we recognize that certain people have certain needs, service providers are coming to see that there's a certain policy reason, keeping up good good heirs, you know, that people other than those who will benefit from the special services will also respect you if you make accommodations at your own expense. But we still have to remember that we're dealing with the property of the proprietor, and ultimately the decision should be his. And if it isn't, then we're really just talking about taking a person's property or forcing them to use it in a way that other people want to use it.
Well, let's talk about the issue as a lawyer who specializes in civil litigation. Do you have any problem with classifying obesity as a disability? Because I know that doesn't sit well with a lot of people.
Well, as a lawyer, I have completely different duties than I do as a politician. So that's one thing I would say. For example, I appear for people in human rights tribunals, and I, defend fully their rights under those codes. But on the political side, I say, yes, I have a problem with it because, being a libertarian, I believe that a person works hard by the sweat of their brow or by the wise investment of their money, should be able to choose what to do with their capital. And we shouldn't forget that if we put enough stresses on any person about what to do with their property and how much money to spend on what, eventually they may just decide, forget it, I'm not going to carry on this business at all. And nobody benefits when they fold up.
But what's the difference, though, between saying, look, you have to accommodate people with physical disabilities, you have to be wheelchair accessible, even if it costs you extra money? What's the difference between that and having, building codes, wherein the government is telling you what to do? Right.
Well, that's another issue we could go into, but again, a person's property is a person's property. If you want to have a door that's 2 feet wide and 10 feet high, and that'll make it difficult for you to get out of, if we're on fire, I think that really should be your choice as well. We do have building codes, and we could go into that. And they're not always designed simply for safety. There are protectionist reasons for codes, and there are money generation reasons for codes, make-work projects and whatnot. And, of course, the graft and corruption that occurs when someone comes through to say whether or not your house meets code.
So do you make a distinction then between the Ontario building codes and this push to make businesses accessible to people with disabilities?
In both cases, I think you're right to see the connection. The connection is that the government is telling people what to do with their property or their money, and I think that in that sense, it's not distinguishable.
Even if I want to build a house
yes.
in this country and put it up myself, I'm going to live there, and maybe if I were even to sign a waiver saying that I would never invite any member of the public through the front doors, even then the government would tell me how that house would have to meet certain codes or I wouldn't be allowed to live there.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I disagree with that.
You do disagree with that?
Absolutely. If you want to put a 3 foot wide building that's 100 feet high in the middle of your farm property and it's a good likelihood it's going to fall down, then that's your own problem. Now, if you're doing something that's dangerous to others and their property, then that's something I do have a problem with.
Well, let's get back to the classification, and that's the question that we're asking today. And as a matter of fact, our phone lines are open. Want to hear your thoughts on this issue today, our viewers. The number to call is 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. So let's get back to this idea of obesity as a disability. A comment from a professor of law at Queen's University said, if you really want to stretch it, every one of us could qualify in some manner or form as a person with a disability, if you really want to stretch and extend disbelief.
Sure. And I don't think
because we're imperfect people.
Yeah, and I don't think we want to belittle the issue. I think there are people with serious physical problems, and no one wants to say that they don't have them. And sometimes to equate a lesser problem with a greater problem is sometimes insulting. But it is the case, for example, that a person who is 6.5 feet tall may have trouble sitting in those airline seats. I'm nowhere near 6.5 feet tall, and I'll tell you, my knees are digging into the back of the seat in front of me if I'm in the regular class.
I am 5'7", and I have a hard time with airline seats.
Right.
I'm very uncomfortable.
But ultimately what we're dealing with is a busing agency that says, we've got so many square feet, we've got so many gallons of fuel, and we've got so many man hours that we have to pay for. We're going to allow you to sit in a certain square footage for a certain price. It's like rent. And if they want to put seats in there that no one wants to sit in, that's a risk they take. But obviously, by choosing the size of seat they've chosen, they've made a profit. And we can't argue with the market.
Do you think that classifying obesity as a disability could set back human rights in terms of, people who have fought so long and hard for people who have disabilities, physical disabilities?
Well, certainly every time you try to give someone a new claim to someone else's property, which is all these are ever doing, okay? I hate to keep batting a dead horse, but really that's what it is. Every time you give someone else the right to say, give me your money so that I can have a bigger seat, you are straining and exposing the whole system to ridicule. And I think maybe rightly so, because what you're really showing is that there is no end when we start pillaging and taking money from one another.
Okay, I want to talk to you more about that, but first we have to take a commercial break. Also, our phones are ringing, but a couple lines open right now. The number to call, 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. Welcome back to Rhonda London Live. The question that we're asking today, is obesity a disability, or should it be seen as a disability? According to the Canadian Transportation Agency, the answer is yes. We're joined in studio by lawyer Paul McKeever, who says that really the government has no business forcing private industry to accommodate really anybody.
That's right.
That it should be up to the individual business or airline, as you know, as in this case, to decide who they want to have as customers.
That's right. I mean, it's a question of property. What is property? Property is rights as against every other person to use a given thing as you see fit. As soon as the government tells you you can't use something as you see fit, you cease to have property in any effective sense of the word. And so what we're really talking about is government taking away your property, commandeering your vehicle in this case.
Okay, our phone's very busy today, and I want to hear what people think about this issue. So let's go to Shelley on line 8. Go ahead, Shelley. You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi, Shelley.
I like your show, and
Thank
this
you.
is a topic that hits very close to home for me personally, given the fact that when I was married, I was 245 pounds at my darkest hour because I was very unhappy. I was obese, and because it was medically avoidable, it was just simply a bad habit. I overate because I was discontented. However, I do also feel for the people that say have thyroid problems or inherent genes to become completely susceptible to being obese. If it is medically unavoidable, yes, it is very disabilitating. However, in my case, it was just simply a fact that I was unhappy, overate, I was fat. Since then, I have lost more than 67 pounds, and I'm only 20 pounds away from where I should. You know why? Because I gave up my bad habits. So both ends of the spectrum, I know what it's like to squish your hips through a chair that's too small and be totally humiliated. However, now I'm more or less in the realms of normalcy where I should be because I'm happier and I am leading a much healthier lifestyle. So I know both ends of the spectrum.
So Shelley, do you think then the airline should have to pick up the tab if a person is too heavy to fit into an airline seat and they need an extra seat? Who should pay for that?
Personally, if it's not a medical issue, I think the person that is just simply overweight should pay for a weight loss clinic program.
Okay, Shelley, thank you so much for your phone call. The fact that obesity can be a temporary condition, should that have any bearing on whether we should view it, at least in the eyes of the law, as a disability or not?
I think that's a red herring, although I sympathize with that sentiment. I mean, for example, Statistics Canada gave us statistics showing that obesity has basically doubled since '78. We have 12% of men and 14% of women in Canada that are categorically obese, and almost 50% that are overweight. And that number, in children, the number has been climbing. I think it's up to 25% of all children now obese.
1 in 4.
So should we be, you know, hate to use the word, but I'm going to, coddling, you know, self-abusive behavior, or should we be saying, look, this is yet another consequence of a poor habit, too many McDonald's meals, of which I'm guilty, and you know, and maybe perhaps not enough activity. But I think that gets away from the real issue, and the real issue is not who is disabled, but who pays and who ought to pay. And really, we're talking about whether or not government should force people to use their property, or rather, should government take away people's property rights, commandeer people's property.
Okay, let's go to Carla on line 6. Go ahead, Carla, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Carla.
Basically, I think that people who are obese are not taking responsibility for themselves, and I think this is just another example. If they expect the airline to pay for their seat, they're not taking responsibility for what they're entirely responsible for. It's, in most cases, I think it's up to them. If they're fit, if they live a healthy life, that's a self-choice, and it's something that most people do have control over. And I agree with the last caller when she said, of course, when there are thyroid problems, and a lot of that is brought on by pregnancy or some other sort of thing that happens in their lives, but still, all in all, there are things that can be done, and people need to take more responsibility for their own actions and their own endeavors, and I see that in the world a lot where people just don't, and this is one very good example of that.
Oh, Carla, I want to thank you for your phone call. We are going to, in just a few moments' time, we're going to meet a woman. Actually, she heads up the Canadian Association for Size Acceptance, and she will tell you sometimes it's just a matter of metabolism. It's not always a matter of willpower, and it's not, I don't think it's fair to classify like every person that you see that's overweight as someone who's had too many McDonald's meals.
That's fair. I agree with that 100%. And it's important not to get into the blame game. Whose fault is it that you're fat? Certain people...
But don't you think that is germane to the argument, though, Paul? Because we're seeing court cases being won where people are being classified as disabled because they're addicted to cigarettes or they're alcoholic.
I don't think that's the issue. I think that's a red herring. Really, the issue is who pays. Whether you're in that state because of something that had nothing to do with your personal choices, or whether you're in that state because of personal choice, the issue is still who pays and why. And why there is a popular feeling that if it's not your fault, if it's something you had no control over, maybe we should force other people to pay for you. But we shouldn't forget that that is something that we should take very seriously, the question of whether to take away someone's property and use it. And the other thing we have to keep in mind with human rights laws, it's very interesting. Here we have government telling us, you, Mr. Plane owner, must use your property in this way. You must use your profits to pay for this person. We have a government that espouses all kinds of care and concern, yet is not willing to spend any of the tax dollars to help this, in this case, the obese person, pay for a seat on a plane.
Like, let's say, in the form of a $25 million a year grant, which is what the airline industry says it would cost.
Perhaps. And I'm not suggesting they do that. But I'm just saying there is a bit of hypocrisy when government says, let the service provider pay, but we'll get all the credit for helping out the people who are inconvenienced.
Paul McKeever, our time is gone, but I want to thank you very much for joining us today on the show. It's always nice talking to you.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Don't go away. We're going to continue this conversation. Phone lines jammed. I promise when we come back, we'll get to more of your phone calls. The number to call is 416-203-0302. We're back with more right after these messages. A controversial finding from the Canadian Transportation Agency. It says obese airline passengers who cannot squeeze comfortably into a single seat should be provided a second one at no extra charge. The reason? Obesity should be viewed as a disability. With her thoughts on this, we're joined by Helena Spring. She's the founder of the Canadian Association for Size Acceptance, or CASA for short. Helena, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's lovely to see you.
So
again.
Obviously you are applauding this decision from the Canadian Transportation Agency.
I am in one way, but in another way, no, I'm not. The reason being, what they want people to have is a medical certificate making them disabled. And there's a lot of plus-size healthy people out in this world. And that would mean insult to injury. I mean, that would open up a whole different can of worms in our social system. And okay, here I have a letter saying I'm disabled, so I'm entitled to handicap parking, I'm entitled to social assistance, I'm entitled to these benefits and that benefit. So it would snowball into a very messy mess. And I mean, the airlines, their bottom line is to make profit. I mean, And they've been making airline seats smaller and smaller over the years. And I know people
down to 17 inches.
I mean, it's
That's
not much. Not
pretty
very
small.
many people have 17 inches butt. That's about that wide enough. You know, size 8, size 10, and the normal North American women's size is size 12, 14, which is you know, obviously they're not comfortable in these seats. A lot of people aren't comfortable, and to target the people that are fat, I'm not going to use the word obese because it's a medical term, but just I'm very comfortable using the word fat. To target fat people, we're the last bastions of discrimination that's allowed. Discrimination has been legislated against people that are of color or race, religion, etc. And but fat people, unfortunately, the only way you can be covered under the Human Rights Code is if fat is looked at as a disability. But I mean, the airlines are in business, you know, to make profit. And you know, every time I flew, I never flew Air Canada, to be honest, because they don't know how to treat. They have a problem treating plus-size people. But I always flew Canadian Airlines. Unfortunately, they're out of business now. But I was always treated with dignity and respect. And every person has that right to be treated with dignity and respect. You're one person, you have one seat. If the plane is half empty, or even if it's full, you ask to be seated either with an empty seat between you or a child. And you know, if the airlines are really gung-ho and forcing you to pay for extra seats, which they want to do, another solution is to just remove the two aisles of 3 seats and put 2 wider seats in, so they're only losing 2 seats per flight. And you know, if they have to absolutely charge, they want to charge 50%, if I'm correct, of the regular economy fare,
That's what they're
even though
doing
you're
now.
buying a discount ticket. So just charge $75 or something, just a token amount if you want a wider chair. It's still discriminatory, but if they're going to go that way, and they're really hard and fast about it. For example,
well, are you uncomfortable with classifying, I know you don't like the term obesity because it is a medical term.
it's an ugly word.
Okay, but for lack of a better term,
Fat.
okay. Well, yeah, but 50% of the Canadian population is considered fat, whereas only like a third of that half are considered obese. So let's use the term obese just for the sake of this conversation. Are you uncomfortable with obesity being called a disability? Because as you suggested, you can be obese and you can be very healthy.
Absolutely. And people also forget that, you know, for example, if you look at a whole family from 3 or 4 generations back, and you see plus-size great-grandparents and plus-size grandparents and husband and wife's family, both plus size, and the kids are big too. You can't tell me genetics has nothing to do with it, because it certainly has. And genetics play a role. The reason I formed CASA is because of deaths of young people, 12 and 13-year-old kids that were literally hounded to death, and their only crime, quote unquote, was to be fat, and it was very tragic. So I formed a Canadian Association for Size Acceptance, or CASA. CASA, as you know, is the Spanish and Italian word for house, and the philosophy behind it is size acceptance begins at and within the home. Kids pick up things. I mean, kids can be so cruel, as well as adults can be so cruel, and you know, kids pick up so much from being home. For example, an offhanded remark from parents while they're watching a television show saying, "Oh, isn't he fat, or isn't she fat, or look at those fat clothes," or whatever, or this person's fatter than that person, which is totally inane, but kids pick it up. And kids are very impressionable, and they bring it to the schoolyard, and the effects of magazines that people are now size 1 and 2. I mean, 15 years ago, we didn't have people size 1 or 2.
Their size is 0.
Oh, I know.
What is that? Okay.
No, are they going to go into the minus now? I mean, but we're...
Callista Flockhart, obviously -1. You know, our phones are really busy, so
great.
let's go to Elizabeth on line 7. Go ahead, Elizabeth. You're on the air.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine.
Great. I'm overweight, and I have been for a great part of my life. I am currently in a late weight loss program. I'm down 40 pounds as of last night,
Wow.
and I'm feeling pretty good. However, I don't consider myself obese. I consider myself very healthy. I'm very attractive, and I still get a couple of looks, and I'm pleased with that. But I'm thinking with if someone's weight affects their lifestyle, it affects those people around them, similar to a codependent in an alcoholic situation, where it is everything around them depends on their weight, then yes, I think it should be considered an obesity. However, if it's not affecting you that way, it's not, as your guest says, it's a medical term. It's not affecting other people around you, then it shouldn't be an obesity. An employer has the obligation to accommodate different genders as far as washroom facilities. An employer must consider alcoholism an illness, and some employers will have to send those people to certain programs if it's affecting their jobs. If someone's weight is affecting their health or their lifestyle or a job, then maybe there should be maybe another term should be created that would allow for the recognition that someone's
Yeah, I see, Elizabeth, I'm going to have to stop you there because we're growing short on time, but I see where you're going with that. If under the law, and this is true, if you're an alcoholic, which is considered to be a disability or an illness, you are protected. Your employer has to give you time off, and in some cases even pay for you to go to a treatment facility. So why not the same for somebody who is really motivated and wants to do something about their weight?
Well, the diet industry, as we know, is $63 billion a year in North America.
It's
in the last
clearly
few years,
not working, considering 50% of the Canadian population is overweight.
First three letters of the word diet is to die, and every time you go on a diet, you get a group of women sitting around, and they're all on diets, and what do they talk about? Food. And it's a little, my message to the public is with CASA is to eat nutritiously, exercise, and get on with your life. Accept yourself, and it's a process. There's a lot of people out there that have had self-esteem destroyed by a cruel word, by parents that are abusive, by siblings that are abusive verbally or physically, and a lot of people that are plus size and have grown up in some sort of abuse, and there's very few. I've met some people that have grown up, but their parents are plus size and their grandparents in a very loving and positive atmosphere, and they come out to be very strong and with excellent self-esteem.
Well, if you want to talk about the willpower issue, I forget how much it is, but if you eat even 100 extra calories every day, which is not even an Oreo cookie, it's an apple. Well, let's make it something really healthy. If you eat an extra apple over and above what you're burning off every day, I think at the end of the year, it's something really astronomical. It's like it's between 10 and 23 pounds that you can gain.
Possibly, yes.
Just by eating an extra apple every day.
Right, but if you go
or
for a
an
walk,
Oreo cookie, let's have a little more
But if you walk
fun.
for 10 minutes, that'll burn it off. You know, that's the whole thing. It's all balance. And so you know, as I say, you eat nutritiously, you eat a balanced meal, and you exercise, you go out for walks. Part of the problem why kids are so obese right now and are gaining weight is that they come home, they're latchkey kids, single parent family or even double parent families, 2 jobs or 1 job. They come in late at night, they work harder. People are working a lot harder for the same amount of money. The expectations are a lot more from an employer, so the person has to produce and produce and produce. So they come home at night, they're exhausted, so they pick up some fast food to go, so the kids are fed, or Kraft dinner or whatever. Also, poverty is a great problem, because there's so much poverty in this province, in this country, that you know you're given a certain amount of money from welfare or from social assistance, and out of that you have to pay your rent and all your expenses, and very little is left for good, healthy food. So what are you going to choose? You're going to choose, you know, a romaine lettuce that's right now $2.50 or $3.50 a head, versus a package of hot dogs, which will feed a bunch of kids.
Okay.
You know, it's a matter of choices too.
We have to take a commercial break, but don't go away. We'll be back with more of your phone calls. A couple phone lines open right now. The number to call, 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. Welcome back to Rhonda London Live. The question we're asking today, should obesity be classified as a disability? Helena, our phone's very busy today. A lot of people want to talk to you, so let's go to Emil on line 3. Go ahead, Emil. You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
If obesity is basically a bad habit or lack of good health, I don't think it should be looked at as a disability, but more of a disorder. For example, I'm only 17 years old, and I have friends who, due to genetics, are obese. They are very healthy and play sports, and by stating that in return, I don't think you can call that a disability.
Emil, thank you so much for your phone call. And that's your problem with calling it a disability, too. On the one hand, if you classify obesity as a disability, it opens up a lot of doors and you have protection.
You can't carte blanche a whole segment of our society. It's just not, it's not correct. It's not proper.
But what else can you do, though, to force airlines to provide proper seating?
You can tell them to. You can make long.
Or why stop at airlines? What about movie theaters?
Well, that's the part of advocacy.
Arenas?
Absolutely, that's the part of what CASA is trying to do, is to advocate that a theater, like they have in England, they have in Europe, that a few seats are made wider, and big deal. It's not a problem. There's certainly lots of areas for disabled people, like blank spaces in theaters and in large, like the Princess of Wales or whatever, but there's no room for plus-size people. You have to sort of squeeze into those small theater seats that squat you down terribly. But certainly if you ask for a chair, they should not be unable to honor that request.
Who, I'd like to know, is fitting into these seats comfortably? Not
many, I hear.
Because even, if I go to the hockey arena, I'm only 5'7", and my knees are like hitting the seat in front of me. Or if I go to the movie theater, it's the same thing.
Well, look on an airplane. Anybody that's tall has also the same space problem. Are you going to make a tall person buy an extra seat? Or what is the criteria for judging someone who's overweight? Are you going to humiliate people by having them stand on a scale before you check into the airport? Are you going to humiliate them by forcing them to sit in an airline seat? And if it doesn't, if you can't fit, are you going to humiliate them by in public, by forcing them to buy another seat? It's terrible. It's discriminatory and it's ludicrous.
Okay, let's go to Judy on line 8. Go ahead, Judy. You're on the air.
You've just been talking about what I observed. The bus seats, all the seats, public seats, are getting smaller as the populace is getting larger. And I don't understand it because I'm underweight all my life, and yet I can't even sit on a bus where somebody's not sitting on top of me when they try to get in beside me. And I'm wondering who is designing these seats. That's what I want to know.
Yeah, Judy, you bring up an excellent point. And who hasn't had that frustration or the discomfort of trying to fit into?
Well, it's maximizing profits. I mean, companies are greedy. Bottom line, it's the money, And then I spoke with a spokesperson from Air Canada, and they said, it's only the last couple of seats in a plane that shows us profit. That's horsepucky. Sorry. I mean, they put whole plane loads of people with free tickets on and with free hotels. That's where their money is going, and so everybody else has to pay the price for it. And it's just not true. I mean, they don't want to change.
Do you think they'll lose $25 million every year, the Canadian airline industry, if they have to go ahead with this and they have to start providing a free extra seat for obese passengers?
No, I don't think so, because they're already losing money anyways. They've knocked out Canadian Airlines, their competition, but there's other airlines around. And if you're treated poorly on one airline, then you go to another airline where you're treated better. That's all. And you're not forced to buy extra seats, or you're treated with dignity and respect, and the extra seat belt fastener is brought to you with discretion and politeness, not who's a fat person that wants this, which has happened before on Air Canada or other airlines.
Oh, that's completely
unnecessary.
It's
terrible. Oh, absolutely. It's horrid.
Let's go to Lakis on line 1. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, you are.
Hi, go ahead. You're on the air.
How are you? First of all, I wanted to say I sympathize with the overweight people, or fat, as lady put it.
Yeah, Helena has no problem with the word fat.
No, not at all, Alexis.
I don't believe, though, the public should pay for it or the business people. I believe that the airlines should provide. I don't believe they're handicapped. They do have certain handicaps, but we cannot stop there. There's short people. I've seen people 5'4". They can't reach to the shelf of the airplane. Is that a handicap? Or the tall people that's 7 feet and they bump their heads and say, well, you should take your shelves higher. You know, there's all kinds of problems in this world. The one thing I have to say is the government should not step in, though. I think the airlines should do it as a good gesture, and I don't believe they're going to lose that kind of money. And there's a lot of people, big people in this world, and they're going to make use of the seats properly.
Well, Lacus, here's the thing, though. If the government doesn't step in and force business to accommodate all people, then it's very unlikely, at least in my opinion, it's very unlikely that it's ever going to happen.
Oh, I agree. They won't do it on their own unless they're legislated to do it. They'll just go on their merry way, totally ignoring everything, and try and make more profit. That's the bottom line. So they have to be told that they have to do it. This is the law. But as I say, the simple solution is just make a couple of seats larger, a couple of rows. They lose 2 seats, not even paying extra. I mean, that's still part of discrimination, but just allowing somebody who's plus size to sit in those seats where they're comfortable, where they're dignified. They don't have to be cramped or sit beside an empty seat or a child. That's bottom line. And they should accommodate people as best they can.
Let's go to Brian on line 4. Go ahead, Brian. You're on the air.
Rhonda.
Hi, Brian.
I heard her mention just a little while ago how it would be humiliating to have to step on a scale. And it scratched my head a bit because I thought, well, say all the companies out there, movie theaters or airlines or whoever, decides to accommodate large people. And they, whether it's sectioned off seats or whether it's seats that work in spatially, the minute the person goes to sit in one of those seats, they are, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, everybody notices it. Then, you know, the people who are watching and themselves. Is that not humiliating in itself?
Brian, you bring up an excellent point, but I would think people have eyes, so they already see if you have a weight problem or.
Yeah, I mean, people aren't blind, but to force someone who is plus size to step on a scale in public in order to fly somewhere because I'm paying the airline for a service, and what are they going to do to me? They're going to humiliate me. Well, forget it. I just won't do it.
Okay, let's go to Walter on line 2. Go ahead, Walter. You're on the air. Hi, Walter. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Okay, I've traveled quite a bit in most public conveyances, and I've shipped a lot of other items on contract, freight, rail, whatever, air.
Right.
And it just occurs to me over the years that people are the only thing that everybody gets the same rate for a seat on a train or a bus or a plane or a cab or what have you. If I want to ship a 500-pound parcel on any other method, I've got to pay for that weight. I've got to pay for, if it's a bulky part, a bulky package that weighs 20 pounds and it's as big as a refrigerator, I'm going to have to pay for that space.
Well, Walter, though, I think that's a pretty specious argument, because if I go into a movie theater, it doesn't matter whether I weigh 115 pounds or I weigh 160 pounds. It's just the price of admission. And you would think that, I mean, it's the same thing.
Well, it sounds like Walter's suggesting that he box all of us up and send us his freight. And that's, sorry to be facetious, but I mean, that's what it sounds like. We're not good enough to be seen in public, and that's really wrong. That's you know, I'm putting a little comical slant on it, but a lot of people feel that way. How dare we go out in public? How dare we fly? How dare we go to the restaurant to eat? You know, and people have this fallacy that fat people always indulge and sit and stuff themselves all day. It's not true. It's only true for very few people, but the majority of people do not. The problem is exercise and other things, and genetics. I mean, that's just the thing. I mean, there's a phys ed person, major, that's done exercise tapes for plus size people, and she weighs over 300 pounds. She's so fit, and she's just built like very solid, and she's the healthiest person around. You going to make her pay for 2 seats? I don't think so.
Helena Spring, our time is gone, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Don't go away. We're going to continue this conversation, talk to a lawyer who specializes in disability issues. The number to call is 416-203-0302. Joining our conversation, Hugh Scher. He's a partner in the law firm of Scher and DeAngelis in Toronto. He specializes in civil and human rights law with a special focus on disability rights. Hugh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Rhonda.
How do you feel about this ruling from the Canadian Transportation Agency saying really that obesity should be viewed as a disability, and as such the airline should make special accommodation for passengers that are too heavy to fit into a single seat?
I think the agency has addressed the real issue here. And what that is that everybody is entitled to equal treatment in accessing services and facilities in this country. And what the agency is saying is that people who travel in the air are entitled to a comfortable and dignified means of travel. And that's what the purpose of our equality provisions are in human rights codes and in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But it's also good customer service. It's what the airlines should be doing as a matter of good service.
Do you think it's really going to cost the Canadian airline industry something in the area of $25 million a year just to accommodate their heavier passengers?
I have a tough time believing that, but again, I don't know what the numbers are. The fact of the matter is, if it is truly an expense that's going to affect the operations of the companies, there are defenses available under the human rights provisions to address those issues. But I don't think that's the issue here. The airlines aren't saying that this is going to bankrupt us. They're not saying that it's going to pose such a huge financial burden that we can't do it. They're saying we don't want to do it. We don't feel it's a priority.
As a lawyer, from a legal perspective, how do you feel about the classification of obesity as a disability? Is that how it should be viewed, at least in the eyes of the law?
Well, again, I think if you accept what is commonly accepted as the social model of disability, we've gone away from looking at disabilities merely as medical conditions, so that we don't just look at somebody and say that, well, they are, that's CP, that's Downs, that's MS. I mean, that's not how we look at disability, and it shouldn't be how we look at disability. What we look at is, well, how does our physical condition or our mental condition, how does that affect us? How does it affect our abilities to engage in social, political, and economic life in this country? That's the real issue.
So
and if you can say that, using that classification, if your physical condition affects your ability to engage in social activity like flying an airplane, then obviously it should be covered and addressed by our human rights provisions, which provide for non-discrimination and equal access to services and facilities in the country.
The fact that obesity could be a temporary condition, it's something that some people have successfully lost weight and gone from being a morbidly obese to being, relatively thin. And some people, although this is really rare, have managed to actually keep the weight off.
Well, so those who don't have the weight issue, it's not going to be a problem for. They can fit into the custom, normal seat. But the problem is...
But just the fact that obesity can be a temporary condition, should it be classified then as a disability? Because it's something...
Sure, because there's a lot of conditions that are... Multiple sclerosis is in large measure a temporary condition. It's a very progressive condition. And nobody would suggest, I don't believe, that multiple sclerosis isn't a disability. I think what's important is to look at how the effect of the physical condition, how it affects your ability to engage in social activity. That's really the test, and that's what the courts and the Human Rights Code recognizes in addressing disability. It says, well, if you're affected in engaging in social activity because of your physical or mental condition, then you're not permitted to be discriminated against, and you're entitled to equal treatment, and that's what it should be.
Hugh, Helena Spring would suggest that really people who are, she uses the word fat, and she's really comfortable using that word, that fat people, that's a last bastion of socially acceptable discrimination. Do you agree with that?
I don't believe that because there are so many
I'm
areas.
not saying that it is acceptable, but it's still viewed or deemed to be socially acceptable.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I mean, I think it is. I think she's correct that that's how it is being addressed. It is being accepted to discriminate against people who have a weight condition. But I mean, that's not the only condition that's being discriminated against. In this context, in the airline context, it's been addressed. I think it's been appropriately addressed. I think it's been legally addressed. I think to do otherwise would be to compromise.
But what about the passenger, though, that is 6.5 feet tall and cannot comfortably fit into a normal airline seat?
And I guess that's really what the issue is. What is and who determines what is the normal airline seat? You know
17,
what I'm saying? Because
17 inches, that's pretty small.
Not only is it small, but where does it come from? I mean, are you 17 inches? Am I 17 inches? I couldn't even say.
No.
But what I'm saying is this. I'm saying that when we look at providing a service, okay, we have to, and we look at accommodating our customers, we need to do so in a way that what the Supreme Court of Canada says accommodates differences. The essence of true equality is the accommodation of difference, whether you're 7 feet tall, 480 pounds, or 4'2". The fact of the matter is that true equality of access, of opportunity, means accommodating those differences, accommodating diversity. And we all have, as a society, have an obligation to do that. And as service providers, airline companies and others have a particular responsibility to ensure that customers can provide dignified and comfortable passage for their customers.
Okay, we have to take a commercial break, but don't go away. We'll be back with more Rhonda London Live right after this. Stay tuned. Well, that's our show for today. Hugh Scher, I want to thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Rhonda.
And I'll be back here again tomorrow at the same time, starting at 2. Hope you'll join me. In the meantime, have a great day.